Welcome to Week 3 lecture for EALD method. Our learning goals for this week, we're going to review Week 2 content and readings, have a bit of a closer look at understanding the requirements of Assessment 1, also explore the requirements of the micro-teaching lesson, and develop an understanding of teaching in an intensive English context, and develop understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander EALD students and how to support them. So the first assessment is due at 5 p.m. on the 22nd of March. There are two parts to the first assessment, and the first one is the lesson adaptation. So you'll need to adapt one lesson plan from a KLA other than English so that it incorporates EALD teaching strategies that are supportive of EALD learners but remain faithful to the learning outcomes of the KLA. You can find the lesson plan online through accessing NESA resources or use one supplied by me. If you can't find one, please get in touch. Check the lesson plan you want to modify with me before you start your assessment. You'll need to use the ESL scales to help identify the language you will need to teach the students through modifying the lesson plan. And make the language goals explicit. Example, teach the use of modal verbs, or teach cohesion in writing, teaching reading, or teaching how to write feature articles, or teaching how to converse fluently using appropriate strategies. Use the standard School of Education lesson plan format. And then you'll need to be able to demonstrate knowledge of a variety of EALD teaching strategies through the modifications that you made, and then include a column that's titled EALD Theory and Teaching Strategies, and explicitly link your lesson modifications to evidence-based teaching strategies that support EALD learners. Your modifications should show a consideration of learners on emerging and developing phases of the EALD progressions, and include at least one ICT-based resource or activity within your lesson plan. And it's about 1,000 words equivalent for this part. You'll need to also create and submit all the teaching resources necessary for the lesson. These teaching resources can be a variety of your own original work or modified resources found online. Your selection and creation of the teaching resources should demonstrate your understanding of what quality teaching is. Part 2 of the assessment is a reflection statement. So you'll need to reflect on the following questions to justify the adaptation to the original lesson plan. Briefly identify and describe strengths that the existing KLA lesson had for EALD learners. Identify and explain the main challenges the original lesson poses for EALD learners, referring to the linguistic and cultural demands on EALD learners. Justify how you attempt to support students to meet the language demands of the original lesson by referring to your adapted lesson, relevant course readings, lectures, and tutorials. Explain how you have differentiated for the needs of emerging and developing learners on the EALD progression. And explain how you would further adapt or modify your lesson for a student who's had interrupted schooling, for example, a refugee student, or an Indigenous student who has English as an additional dialect. And if you can include evidence from research-based articles for the 5th question. So you just need to submit an electronic copy of the lesson plan resources, and rationale as one document through Turnitin by the 22nd of March. Another element of our method this semester is micro-teaching. So micro-teaching is the planning, presentation, and evaluation of a lesson over a shortened period of time, like a 10-minute mini lesson. It provides opportunities for students to practice teaching competencies, observe peers, and also engage in peer review. So the teaching focus areas to be keeping in mind while you do the micro-teaching is grammar in context, reading, listening, vocabulary in context, punctuation in context. So 10 minutes is not very long. So some really helpful advice is plan. Focus on one aspect of your topic. Practice with your friends or family or peers and be organised. Plan what you're going to put on the board. If you need to prepare a script, do you have to organise any worksheets? Get them all ready to distribute. You'll need to put some learning intentions up for your micro-teaching and begin with an active verb. For example, here you've got add punctuation, join simple sentences to form, identify base words, read the poem to categorise how the people, etc. And don't use just general words such as understand, think about, reflect, observe. Really think about what the students need to specifically do to show their understanding or thinking or reflection. For example, here are some examples of including explicit teaching instruction. Today we'll learn some rules for forming nouns ending in ION. Turn to your partner for 30 seconds and brainstorm as many words ending in ION as you can. Let's make a list of about 15 words. Are they all nouns? With the same partner, identify the base word for some words on the list. What patterns do you notice? State the pattern simply. For each pattern in step 5, add at least one more example. And when you're thinking about the micro-teaching, show that you can organise for individual, pair, group, and class learning. Focus on the learning that the students are doing, not the teaching. And provide an imagined context. Example, teaching level 3 or year 9. It's after lunch. It's on a Friday afternoon. And you link it to the past and following lesson and let us know what KLA you're teaching in. So your micro-teaching can actually be part of the lesson that you are adapting for your assessment 1. So I guess the key is to be prepared. If you can complete the short survey by using the QR code which is up on the screen, then you'll be able to nominate your preferred weeks to do your micro-teaching. We'll be having opportunities in week 5, week 7, and week 8. So you'll be asked in the survey to nominate your order of preference, and then I'll be able to organise that and let you know as soon as possible which week you're actually going to be delivering your micro-teaching to your peers. So if you need to pause the PowerPoint recording and complete that survey, and then you can continue. I'm going to spend a bit of time looking at the intensive English program that's available for students in New South Wales government schools. And hopefully one day you will be able to get a chance to visit or even perhaps work in an intensive English centre or the intensive English high school. They are quite amazing places to work. I have had the good fortune of working at several IECs. My first one I worked at was Fairfield IEC, and then most recently Holroyd IEC, which is near Marylands and Parramatta area. So Holroyd IEC has a mixture of migrant, refugee and international students who attend. They can enrol at any point in time. There's a wide range of educational backgrounds. So some students have had regular schooling before arriving in Australia, and others have had disrupted or very little schooling. The average length of time at the IC is 30 weeks, about 3 school terms. And as we've spoken about before, refugee students and those with disrupted education or special needs may stay longer. They can have up to 50 weeks. But there are some other students who may only need to stay 10 or 20 weeks, depending on their level of English when they arrive already in Australia, their age, for example, if they're a senior student, and their date of arrival. So this is a spread of students at 181. This is at end of term 4 last year. So as you can see, there are students from every single year, year 6 all the way up to year 11. That's quite a large number of students in year 11 who would be exiting and probably needing to go to start year 11 in term 1 2023. When students come to enrol at an intensive English centre, they're either categorised as regular or special enrolments. Regular enrolments are those who have had regular schooling in their first language, and they may have had exposure to English, but usually they've just had regular education in their home country before coming to Australia. Special enrolments are those who have had disrupted education of more than 2 years, or perhaps they've had limited education or none at all before coming to Australia. They also may have a physical, intellectual disability. They may have serious medical concerns which are impacting on their learning, or they may have behavioural or psychological issues which are impacting on their learning. Those students are called special, and they're entitled to 40 weeks of IEC time, whereas regular students are entitled to 30 weeks at the most. So as you can see at Holroyd at the end of last year, the majority of students, 72% of them, classified as special and 28% as regular. So the special students, most of them have come from refugee backgrounds and disrupted learning. The Intensive English program is coordinated by the New South Wales Department of Education, by the Multicultural Education Team. They're based at the Parramatta office. So there are 16 intensive English sites across New South Wales, 15 IECs and 1 intensive English high school, which is based at Alexandria. And most of the sites are in Sydney in areas of high need. There are 2 regional sites, one at Warrawong, which is Wollongong, and Armidale, where they've had an influx of students coming from the Yazidi population. So all teachers who work at an IEC must be EALD or TESOL trained in addition to their main teaching method. So what do they do? So Intensive English Centres and the Intensive English High School provide intensive English tuition to newly arrived high school aged students whose first language is not English. And that's across all key learning areas. So they are covering the curriculum that all students in a regular high school would be covering. But in addition to the intensive English tuition, IECs and the Intensive English High School provide orientation, settlement and wellbeing programs to prepare students for learning in a New South Wales government high school and how to participate in Australian society. So here's an example of an on-arrival writing. Now, these are provided in a PDF and we'll be able to spend some time and look at these during the tutorial session as well. Now just have a look at what can this student do. They've just arrived and this is what they're able to produce. As you're having a look at that, think about where do you think they'd fit on the EALD learning progression? So this next sample of writing is the same student and they've spent 30 weeks at the IEC and look at what they're able to do now. I'll be asking people to have a look at this a bit more closely. As I said, the PDF is available for you to look at that more closely. And I'd like you to think about what are the main differences between the first sample and this second sample. So the Intensive English program is based on two key documents. There's the Intensive English program's curriculum framework, secondary, and the ESL scales, which we've looked at previously. So the curriculum framework, it's a programming and reporting tool for all the teachers in the Intensive English program to use. It's text-based, so it's based on genre theory, and it focuses on the language and the skills so that teachers can provide structured support for students before they enter mainstream high school. There are 4 levels in the curriculum framework: Foundation, Level 1, Level 2 and Level 3. And the outcomes are organised across modes: oral interaction, reading and viewing, writing and representing. And the types of texts are organised into imaginative, persuasive and informative. This has recently been revised after many months of consultation with staff teaching across all the intensive English centres, and it has been updated and is available in digital form on the Multicultural Education website. The ESL scales, as we have spoken about before, provide a benchmark for students' achievement and their progress in English. And they provide a common language for teachers across all contexts. They help teachers to identify language level required for success in mainstream syllabuses. And it's also helped and it's used to arrange the Intensive English program curriculum framework into the 3 strands of oral interaction, reading and responding, and writing. As we have looked at before, the ESL scales also have strand organisers: communication, language and cultural understanding, language structures and features, and strategies. On this slide, you can have a look at the ESL scales levels and where the beginning reading and responding and the beginning writing levels match to the oral interaction, reading and responding, and the writing. You can also see on the right-hand side the relationship between the ESL scales and the curriculum framework levels. These are visible in the handouts, which you're able to have a look at, and we will also be able to talk about them. So, in the earlier writing samples, the student arrived at scales 1 to 2 and exited at a scale 4 in writing. Spent 4 terms at the IC. Teaching in an IC, it's just good to know where you sit. So the Australian curriculum is the overarching part of the umbrella, and underneath that sit the New South Wales syllabuses. Then there's KLA secondary context, and then we have the Intensive English Program curriculum framework. And what the Intensive English Program curriculum framework brings is a real text-based approach, using the ESL scales, using the teaching and learning cycle, keeping BICS and CALP in mind, thinking about the mode continuum where students move along from more spoken-like to more written-like production of texts. There are criterion-referenced assessments. The whole theories behind second language acquisition and using the zone of proximal development are fundamental to how teaching in an ISC takes place. This is a grammar continuum, which is also used by teachers in the intensive English centres. It's really helpful because it looks at language in context, thinking about language features, not just grammar specifically. There's increasing complexity across the levels from foundation up to level 3. And hopefully, ideally, students should be able to recognise and understand the function of all these language features by the end of level 3. When we think about EALD pedagogy and what takes place in the classroom in intensive English centres, a great deal of scaffolding and modelling of tasks, a variety of group learning activities, that might be pair work, small group, whole group, opportunities to speak, listen, read and write in English in every single lesson. It doesn't matter which KLA that is being taught. Resources and activities are relevant and engaging, and the teaching and learning cycle, modelled, guided and independent, is key. This is an example of an activity you can run with a class called running dictation, an example of an EALD strategy. It's quite engaging for students. It involves all the skills areas because the students have to focus on speaking clearly, then listening for information and making sure it's written down correctly. You can use a running dictation with any topic in any KLA. You could use it to focus on any area that you like, for example, spelling of new vocabulary, punctuation and grammar, or introducing new content or revision of content. It really helps as you are doing these activities because it's about know your students and how they learn. And it's also important to have good classroom management before you attempt to do these activities. So running dictation looks like this. This would be the instructions to the students to practice. So we're going to do a running dictation. We're going to practice your speaking and listening skills in English. Listening for information, retelling information, reconstructing text, and spelling and punctuation is important. So I'll invite the students to say these words aloud together as a class. And look at images and visuals because we are teaching them the vocab and the content about Australian culture and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories. So there's a lot of talking and labelling, use of videos if possible, and some images of what Australia looked like when the white people first came. So here are the instructions given to the students. They make a team of 2 people. The people in your group must not speak the same language. I know in some schools that may be difficult, but we're trying to insist on that they speak English. So one person in the group is the runner and the other is the writer. The runner actually has to walk because you're not allowed to run. They walk to the wall to read the 6 sentences one at a time. They remember the sentence, then go back to their partner and tell them what to write. The runner is not allowed to write. They're only allowed to retell what they remember. So the writer writes down exactly what their partner tells them on the sheet. They can write the 6 sentences in any order. The writer must stay seated and is not allowed to stand up. So the first team with all 6 sentences written down correctly is the winner. Students need to be careful with spelling and punctuation and write neatly. When you're finished, put your hand up for your teacher to check your writing. And of course there are rules when you're running this activity. There's no yelling out or calling across the room. There's no pushing, no running, and you can only speak in English. Now work together to put your sentences in an order that makes sense and read the text aloud. So have a think about this because we'll come back to it during our tutorial. So what kind of skills do students develop during the running dictation activity? And what's the value of an activity like this? What kind of challenges do students face during this activity? And as a teacher, how can you mitigate these challenges or barriers? And then as a teacher, what kind of follow-up activity could you do next? to ensure that learning is taking place. So EALD in high school may look a little different. Often there is less time for these kind of activities, as more often than not, EALD teachers are supporting individual classes in regular KLA classes. The EALD teachers are bound by the content and the objectives of the mainstream syllabuses. And it's one of the key things that EALD teachers do is to modify resources and assessment tasks to support EALD learners so that they can access the content and demonstrate their understanding and learning. So here's an example of modifying activities and resources in history. So have a little think. How do you simplify the language and content without dumbing it down or removing key information? How do you maintain the integrity and the level of the task, but add additional scaffolding and support for students? And how do you teach study skills and independent learning to EALD learners, particularly those who've come from an intensive English centre who may lack those independent skills for themselves? Again, you might want to refer to your PDF. There's an example of the original assessment task where the instructions are unclear and there is a bit of scaffolding, but it's a bit ineffective for the EALD learners. So as you can see on the right hand side of the slide, there's the task has been adjusted to support EALD learners. There's a planning page with key questions, space for the students to write down their thoughts and ideas in dot points, and additional scaffolding on the writing page. We'll spend some time looking at this in the tutorial as well. So in summary, IECs have an important role to play in the education of newly arrived students. EALD pedagogy and perspectives, with a focus on using and understanding language in context, is so important to support EALD learners. And if you think about it, EALD pedagogy is just good pedagogy. It's explicit teaching. Another group of EALD learners in Australian schools are potentially Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. We're looking back at the original definition of ESL at that time was students who are able to speak another language other than English in the home, or have a parent guardian who speaks a language other than English in the home. In New South Wales, there are many Aboriginal students who identify with an Aboriginal language, example Wiradjuri, but we can't assume any knowledge or proficiency in that language, as it's a heritage language. Many New South Wales Aboriginal students are not Labote, but they are actually dialect learners. So they have a dialect other than English. So Aboriginal EALD learners are students whose first language is a language or dialect other than standard Australian English, and who require additional support to assist them to develop English language proficiency. The Queensland Government has put together a capability framework for teaching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander EALD learners, and it is an excellent resource that's worth looking at. The EALD Hub has been developed by other states in Australia, and it also is an excellent resource with professional learning and information to support you. The Deadly Dialects e-learning resource is flexible and self-paced. It's recommended for K-2 staff as a great tool to engage Aboriginal children in code switching between Aboriginal English dialects and standard Australian English. And finally, some other resources that are available if you're interested in finding out more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander EALD learners is there's a YouTube case study from South Australia, Port Augusta, Tracks to Two-Way Learning, which is, again, additional professional learning. It's very helpful from Western Australia. And What is Aboriginal English on ABC News.